This is the STV News. Good evening. It's the final budget before we go to the polls in the next UK election, and Jeremy Hunt is cutting national insurance again. Duty on drink and fuel is being frozen, but he's introducing a tax on vapes for the first time, with taxes also going up on cigarettes. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, branded the financial plans as the last desperate act of a party that has failed. The Scottish Government say it's a betrayal of public services. Here's our political correspondent, Ewan Petrie.
This was a Chancellor under pressure to turn his party's fortunes around ahead of an election.
When's the election, Chancellor?
Many of the measures in his red box were already known before he found his way to the House of Commons.
Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah. So his key announcement came as little surprise.
Employee national insurance will be cut by another 2p from 10% to 8%. And self-employed national insurance will be cut from 8% to 6%. It means an additional £450 a year for the average employee, or £350 for someone self-employed.
The Chancellor announced an extension to the windfall tax on energy companies. He said the non-dom tax regime will be replaced, and he increased the high-income threshold for child benefit to £60,000.
A plan to make work pay versus no plan. Growth up, jobs up, taxes down. I commend this statement to the House.
Labour called the budget a last desperate act of a failed party.
Britain in recession, the national credit card maxed out, and despite the measures today, the highest tax burden for 70 years.
This is a last-ditch, tone-deaf approach to desperately try to recover in the polls. It's the embodiment of the Tory party before the people.
For the hospitality industry, there was disappointment after their calls to cut VAT were ignored.
The UK is literally the highest VAT for the hospitality industry. In Europe, you're 7%. We had it 12.5% in COVID, and that was an amazing help to the whole industry. It needs to go back to that.
Layla is about to start an apprenticeship at this packaging firm. She fears the longer-term impact of the cut to national insurance.
They're trying to benefit us and make these little cuts, but it adds up in terms of the spending on the other end of the line. So you wonder if maybe you have longer waiting times, things like that, and it might actually not be worth it in the end.
90% of sales here go to the drinks industry. They welcome the freeze in alcohol duty, but wanted the Chancellor to go further.
So if the whisky industry is doing well, we're doing well. A lot of countries around the world, whisky is a high export product, actually set their domestic prices based on the prices here in Scotland. So higher prices in Scotland mean higher prices globally, which impacts the competitiveness and the growth in Scotch whisky.
The Chancellor believes the UK is about to turn the corner on growth. He hopes this package of measures will be enough to win over voters ahead of an election, whenever that may be. Ewan Petrie, STV News.
Well, the Chancellor is facing criticism from his own party here in Scotland. That's because the windfall tax on oil and gas firms is staying in place, despite the Scottish Conservatives saying it's bad for North Sea jobs. Well, earlier our Westminster correspondent, Paris Gurtsianis, spoke with the Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross.
I fought hard to get it out of the budget. Now, I'm disappointed it was in there. I'm disappointed that's a choice that the Chancellor has taken, but I also understand the really difficult balancing act he had with this budget. But I'm now going to use every opportunity going forward to ensure that this legislation that is required doesn't go through.
You can see how this looks, though. I mean, what does this say about the influence that the Scottish Tories have at Westminster?
I could have done the usual political thing and said nothing about it and shied away from it. Or I could have stood up for the North East and the oil and gas sector. The other parties, the SNP and the Labour Party, their plans would see tens of thousands of jobs lost. Both of those parties don't want to see any further drilling for oil and gas in the North Sea. We are the party that is supporting that.
Well, to the day's other stories now, and STV News understands a public inquiry into the police's handling of the Emma Caldwell murder investigation will be announced by the Justice Secretary tomorrow. Today it emerged her killer Ian Packer plans to appeal his conviction and 36-year jail sentence. Emma Caldwell's mother, Margaret Caldwell, met with the Chief Constable today and is set to meet the Lord Advocate tomorrow.
For far too long, those responsible for gifting a killer his freedom have remained in the shadows. Now they must face the glare of public scrutiny, and the only forum for that can be before a statutory judge-led public inquiry. The victims of Packer deserve nothing less.
5 people have been arrested after the UK government building in Edinburgh was sprayed with red paint in a protest over the conflict in Gaza. Campaigners from This Is Rigged also removed the Union flag and replaced it with a Palestinian one. Football now, and Hearts chairwoman Anne Budge will not rule out the club reducing future ticket allocations for Hibs fans at Tynecastle after a number of missiles were aimed at captain Lawrence Shankland from the away end.
We know how good the derby games are, and for both sets of fans it's what we want. But if we can't achieve it, then yeah, we may have to look at doing what we've done elsewhere.
And finally, Brendan Rodgers could be in the stands for the next Old Firm derby after being charged by the SFA for his comments about referees following their defeat to Hearts. The Celtic boss labelled these decisions by referee Don Robertson and VAR as awful. His hearing is on the 28th of March. That's your late news and sport. Now here's Sean with the weather.
A heavy downpour will subside, and light relaxation will set in. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Very good evening to you. Now, if you're watching from Fort William, Oban, Ballachulish, Tobermory or Malik, well, here we're going to have the best of the sunshine, brighter weather over the next couple of days. Elsewhere, we start seeing more and more cloud coming in from the east. It's eastern parts where we've had largely cloudy skies today. We hang on to that during tonight. In the west, the best of the cloud breaks, the risk of a few mist and fog patches around here. Now, tomorrow, the weather very similar to today. The best of the sunshine in western parts. Once any mist and fog clears away, feeling quite pleasant with highs up to about 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. Whilst in the east, around Fife, Edinburgh, East Lothian, the borders here in particular, we will have thicker cloud and the risk of some light drizzly showers. Right down on the east coast, temperatures about 7 or 8 degrees Celsius, turning even chillier in the next couple of days. But where we hang on to that sunshine, Argyll, the Highlands doing particularly well, 10 or 11 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees in Fahrenheit. That sunshine getting squeezed more and more back towards the northwest coast over the next couple of days, elsewhere becoming cloudier and also a wee bit damp. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
And that's where we'll have to leave it for now. Thanks for staying up. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.